Welcome to the video. It's all about this, my model Runabout from Deep Space Nine. It's a scratch built model, the first that I've made, and this video is all about the build process, so I'll be walking you through how I made it from scratch, from start to what we see here. There were a couple of things I wanted to achieve with my model from the outset. One was that it be bigger than the models that you could buy. They're not as big as this. This is about 22 inches long, so it is quite big. Another thing I wanted was that I have not just engine lights, but cabin lights as well. For it to be mounted on a base, that it be mains powered, not battery powered, and that it be kind of adjustable on the base, so that you can kind of set it to the best angle when it's displayed. So I pretty much achieved all of that, and let me talk you through the rest of the process. So the first thing I needed to do was get some plans. So obviously the internet's great for that, so I went on there and found some plans. I had like a side view, a top view and a front view, and I scaled them to be the size I kind of wanted and got that printed. And then I bought some balsa wood and some knives and some glue and all the rest of it. And yeah, began work. The first thing I did was make the bottom and the bulkheads. I kind of figured out where I wanted the bulkheads to be, and then the beginnings of what was to be the cockpit. Whilst it was still basically just a frame, I set to work on making the interiors. So to do that, I needed to do a lot of fun research on what the inside of the Runabouts looks like. I went for the kind of later look because it was kind of more open and sort of simpler to do. Then it was a lot of sort of Photoshop work to sort of print out labels, scale them right and get the colours kind of about right and stick them all together onto the wood. Once I'd done that, it was time to sort of make a bit more out of the cockpit. I realised I'd need more space inside the cockpit than I'd allowed myself before. So once I had the kind of the size of the cockpit set, it was then time to start making the little like the dashboard inside the cockpit, and the little chairs that went with it as well. I made those out of Fimo. So then again, it was a matter of using like the Drex files, which was Doug Drexler's blog, which unfortunately seems to have been taken down now for legal reasons, but that was a wealth of information, so loads of cool stuff on there. And obviously the Deep Space Nine technical manual's got all the ocudograms and stuff in, so it's quite fun sort of scaling those down to fit my little balsa wood sort of control panels. I'd originally thought about putting a transporter in the back where it would be, but even though I built it and put it in, I realised it was going to kind of just take up too much room, and the point was I wanted to be able to kind of see through the ship, but with the transporter like clunked in there, especially through the side windows, you really couldn't sort of see anything, so I decided not to bother having a transporter. So now the interior of the cockpit was basically finished. I needed to do the same at the aft end of the ship, but before I did that, I wanted to make sure that the back windows would work. So the first thing I did at the rear of the ship was to start making those 5 windows and the kind of the supports that would go up to form the beginning of the roof. So then once I'd done that, I made the little bunks. Again, for the same reason with the transporter, I decided not to put the table and chairs and stuff in there because they just cluttered it up and you really couldn't see anything. So once I'd done that, it was time to start building the engines. I bought just in Asda, I think, just a supermarket, I bought like a cheap folder for admin stationery stuff, and it was just a sort of translucent blue plastic. It was like £1 to buy it. So that's what I made, the part of the engine that lights up blue. I made that out of that. I had these LEDs you can get I got them from Maplin's, I guess you can get them elsewhere, and they're kind of strips of LEDs about this long, and they're flat and they're flexible and they hook together and they run off the mains. The good thing also is you can cut them up into groups of 3s and kind of solder them together and lengthen them, which was good because obviously I was going to have lights all around the ship. I was getting quite excited by this point because you could kind of put the engines next to the fuselage and kind of get an idea of how big the thing was actually going to be when it was finished, and just it was quite exciting at that stage to see it even slowly taking shape a bit. Now the one bit that was going to be tricky always from the start, I thought, was how to make the Passard collector at the front, the red bit that lights up red, because I didn't know what material to make that out of. Obviously it's got to be at least somewhat transparent so that it can glow red, but I didn't know what to make it out of. So the first thing I had to do was make a block out of wood and sand it to the right shape and size. That was kind of then my master to make the mold out of. And it sort of fitted quite nicely into the slot it needed to go into. And then also from Maplins, I found this product called Polymorph, and you kind of put these little beads in quite warm water, and you can kind of mold it, and then it sets quite quick. And if you make it thin enough, it is translucent. But oh man, it was really tough and fiddly to work with, and it's kind of sticky and goopy, and if it touches itself, it sticks to itself, and there's no way you can pull it apart without just ruining everything you've done. After lots of aborted attempts, I finally managed to make a decent Bassard collector which fitted in, and then of course I had to do it all again to make the other one, because obviously I need two. So at this point it's getting a bit more of a finished ship now. So I'd always intended to have the ship mounted on something. I had a table leg. It had just a screw in the bottom, just so you could slightly tweak the height of each leg, I guess, if it's slightly uneven floor you've put it on. So that was really handy, because upside down this table leg come right up with a screw thread that would fit right in top, and I could also run the wires through this table leg. Eventually, as it went along, I would use I essentially made a big washer out of a scrap bit of thin metal. It was actually the top of a broken DVD player. Just to distribute the stress, because I didn't want to screw just directly into the really soft balsa wood. But this was earlier on, before I'd done that. So the next thing was to make kind of the wings, to get the more curved elements on the back end of that. It was a matter of just gluing some of the thickest balsa together I had into a block, and then sanding it to shape, and then just kind of eyeballing it to see how much more I needed to sand off. From the show, we know they had the kind of engine glowing bits under those wings. I was using some tin foil to bounce the light around a bit more, and also hopefully to try and prevent any light leaks, because the balsa was very thin in some places, and I was worried that you'd see the LEDs inside glowing through the actual wood. The wiring was getting a bit more complicated inside the ship at this point, because I decided I definitely wanted to have the engines and the cabin lights independent of each other. So that meant, instead of there being now 4 wires to do all the lights, there'd be 8. Now it was time to start putting the sides on, but also, of course, almost all of the interior of the ship you can see. It's only the very middle where the mount is that you can't see from the outside. So I had to build another interior where it was essentially just the graphics on the opposite walls. Then it was time to start putting the glass in the windows. So I just again went to Asda and bought like 10 cheap CD cases, and just used the CD cases to make the glass. They're quite fiddly to cut. You've got to be very precise to fit it in these wooden frames that I'd made. I had quite a few go wrong and split, and man, you have to start again. Before I inserted them, I covered them with masking tape, because obviously I knew that we're going to be painting this thing at some point, so I had to make sure that they were protected from the paint. Then it was time to start installing the lights in the ceiling. So I used just some sort of plastic just to kind of diffuse it a bit and help the light still come through from the top. Then it was a matter of making the warp core that sits on the very top of the ship. That was a relatively simple thing to make and glue together to fit the scale that was on my plan, so that wasn't too tough. Then I needed to make a little man to be flying piloting the runabout, so just made him out of picture wire and some more of that Fimo, and then painted him. He's not the best looking guy close up, but yeah, he does the job. It was kind of finally time to glue all that cockpit interior together, which is something I've been holding off of doing for ages. So I kind of glued it in place, and then was sealing in the hole. So that was just glue big chunks of wood to it, and then just sand it down to conform to the shape that it needed to have, whilst putting the glass in. Same for both sides, obviously. I always tried to work and keep the ship symmetrical. I didn't ever do like loads on one side and then have to catch up on the other. I kind of down the ship. Okay, so the next thing to do was the kind of deflector dish torpedo launcher that sort of sits on the underside at the front. It was pretty straightforward to make, although it was quite fiddly because the wood was pretty thin in places. The next thing I did was to make the windscreen at the front, and man, that was a real arse. It was really difficult. Again, I was, as before, I was using the CD cases, so I'd cut out a sort of squarish shape, a rectangle that was going to fit the right width for the frame it was going to go in at the front, and then I had to melt the plastic to form that angle that's on the glass there. I had to build a little jig that was to the right angle that I wanted the window to be, and then hold the plastic in some pliers over the electric hob until it started to deform and melt, and then quickly stick it on this jig and kind of press it into shape. And it was very difficult. I think I had to do it 8 or 9 times until it actually worked and wasn't all bent and a mess or blackened and gone all kind of melted and gooey and a mess. So after that, the next thing was kind of making all the little detaily bits in front of the wings on the front, or those kind of triangular parts that kind of form the brace, all of that stuff. At this point, I could still take the wings off, and my plan was to always keep the ship able to do that, so I could access the mount. So if I wanted to take it off the mount, I could, etc. But I realised 2 things. One, there was going to be a lot of light leaks, and I really didn't think there was any way I could keep it removable and have a sort of seamless join with no light spilling out. Secondly, there was now a time constraint because I had to move house, so I didn't want to try and move the thing when it was all still kind of in separate pieces. So I decided I was going to have to glue it all together, mount it on the base. All the wiring inside, that was to be finalised. The base made, it was pretty basic, just MDF tacked and glued together. I had a turntable mechanism inside it. I kind of wanted to be able to rotate it, at least to some degree. You can adjust the angle of it a little bit, which I think is kind of cool. I also knew in the base I wanted to incorporate like a little Akuda-Graham L-Kazi panel type deal. I knew I wanted to have independent control, as I said before, over the engine lights and the cabin lights, and now with this panel I wanted to be able to turn that on and off independently as well. So there's 3 switches to control all of those independently. The graphic I came up with to go in the L-Kazi panel was this one. I kind of did it in a hurry before I moved, and kind of after I'd done it I wondered if it was really sort of super appropriate. So this one we see here isn't actually the final one used. I managed to achieve my goal. It was, apart from a few little bits here and there, it was basically ready to be painted. But before I did that, I've learned, model makers would know this, you need to seal the wood, basically put like varnish or sanding sealer on it so that the paint doesn't just sort of sink into the sponge-like balsa wood. So the first sort of month or 2 at this new house, I was just putting this goop on. And so here's a shot of it in the new kitchen, ready to be painted for the first time. And here's various layers of primer in different greys and whites, and then I was using masking tape to mask various parts of it off. Obviously the windows and the engine bits that would light up, they were masked off, but I was also masking off parts of the hull to kind of get the different panels and that kind of Aztec look that we hear about with these Star Trek models. I had some reference stills of the shooting miniature, and it's got all these really kind of nice subtle different hues and colours in there, and I wanted it to at least try and have some of that in mind. Even if it wasn't obviously as good, it would at least kind of hint that there's different kind of colours and tones in there. And a lot of that I was trying to do with paint initially, because that seemed logical to me. Even on the underside, I had masked it off. I knew you wouldn't really see the bottom of the thing that much, but I kind of made a token effort to at least have some different colours and stuff on the bottom of the thing as well. So all then that was really left was to paint all the small fiddly bits that were easier to paint before I put them on. So the little phaser strips, the little kind of engine vent things that kind of sit along the side of the ship, these sensor things that are above the front windows. And so then basically all that was left to do was put the decals on. I did manage to find a company called Crafty Computer Paper. You can basically make your own water slide decals. So that was really helpful, not just for the obvious stuff like the ship's name and the pennant and that, but I realised that I could do a lot more with these decals to imply the kind of hole markings that I spoke of than I could do with the paint. It was quicker and easier and more modifiable and not so time consuming and expensive, because it was a lot to mask it off and keep putting paint on. So yeah, all then that was left was to put the final Akudagram in, and it was done. So yeah, I hope you liked the ship. Thanks for watching, and thank you very much.